Chapter 2. The Battle Begins. John grew up surrounded by sickness. However, being surrounded by sickness and being sick yourself are two completely different things. While John was still young, his legs started to ache a bit. He went to several doctors who told him that he had rheumatism and that they could not make it better. His legs started to ache more and more and more until the pain became so constant and very strong. Not only that, but his legs started to look misshapen and deformed. It was like his body was not his own anymore, and he felt like he was being kicked out of it and the disease was taking over. John was in so much pain. He couldn't take it. The doctors can't help me. I wonder if God can, John thought to himself. The only person he had seen healed was a lady in a church. And he had also heard about a man called John Alexander Dowie, a man who had prayed and seen a lot of people healed. Now, Mr. Dowie, he had a special healing home in Chicago. So John, he decided to go to Chicago to see if God would heal him. When he got there, his legs were so painful and he could barely move them enough to drag himself into the healing room and sit down. An older man came and put his hands on John and started to pray. As soon as he started to pray, John could feel the presence of God, and his legs straightened out and the pain disappeared completely. The disease that had been trying to kick him out of his own body was now kicked out by God, and John was free at last. For the first time, John discovered for himself that there was something more powerful than sickness. Sickness and disease had been beating his family up far too long. Now John knew that God could beat the sickness. John rushed home and grabbed his brother. His brother had been sick for many years, and it looked like he was not going to be alive much longer. "You have to come with me," John said. "I have been healed by God, and I know God can heal you too." His brother was hardly able to stand because he was so sick, so John took him and carried him all the way to Mr. Dowie's home. People came and put their hands on his brother and prayed for him as he lay in a bed half dead. Immediately, he jumped out of the bed and he was completely healed. John's brother had been sick for 22 years, and in less than 22 minutes, God completely healed him. The next one needing healing in John's family was his sister. She had breast cancer. There was no cure for breast cancer in those days. The only thing left for the doctors was to try to make her comfortable until she died. Even though the doctors were giving her lots of medicine, she did not feel very comfortable. She was so weak that she had to be carried everywhere. She also had a lot of pain. In spite of all the medicines, she could still feel the pain day and night. It was very painful for John to see his sister suffering so much. John now knew that God healed people, and he was not going to stand by and watch his sister die. John had decided, "God, I am going to bring my sister to you. I know you can heal, and I believe you're going to heal my sister." Even though the cancer was spreading from one big lump into smaller lumps, even though his sister did not believe that God could heal her, even though she was preparing to die, and even though the rest of the family and the doctors had given up all hope, John, he knew that God could heal her. He took her to Mr. Dowie's healing home. She stayed there for several days and people prayed for her. While she was there, she listened to people preaching from the Bible. After a little while, she started to believe what it said in the Bible, and she believed that God could heal her. In the same moment she believed, the pain disappeared, and she felt so much better. A few days later, a big lump fell off her body. It was the cancer. It was not supposed to be in her body, so God pushed it out and cut it off. The smaller lumps were still in her body, but the main lump of the cancer had been completely cut off, and you could hold it in your hands. A few days later, the smaller lumps disappeared. There was not one spot of disease left in her. God had completely healed her. So God had healed John, his brother, and his sister at Mr. Dowie's healing room. Can you imagine how excited John felt? For his whole life, he had seen people he loved die, and now God was healing the people that he loved. John could not stop yet. There were more people in his family who were sick. John planned to take another of his sisters who was also dying. As with the other siblings, the doctors had given up all hope. But this did not stop John. He now knew that God was far more powerful than any doctor. As he was getting ready to take his sister to Mr. Dowie's home, he got a phone call from his mother. John, your sister is dying. If you want to see her before she dies, you need to come home quickly. So John rushed to the house. When he got there, the room was full of people. They were all crying. His sister was lying on her bed and she was not moving. Everyone in the room knew what had happened. Trembling, John tried to find her pulse, but it was not there. Her heart had stopped beating and she was dead. John was so sad. He was completely devastated. He remembered all the people he loved who had died. Now there was one more. He wasn't the only person who was suffering. Beside his sister's bed, there was a small bed, and in that bed was his sister's baby. John looked at the baby, lying there by itself. It was so small and alone. This baby cannot grow up without his mom, he thought. My sister has to live. She has to be here with her baby and look after it. John knew that God could heal people who were sick. He also knew that in the Bible, Jesus had raised some people from the dead. He walked up and down the room as he thought about it. John needed somebody else who would pray with him, somebody else who really believed that God could make his sister alive again. He looked around the room. Everyone was crying. None of them would be able to help him. In fact, John could only think of one man who really believed God could do such an impossible thing, and that was Mr. Dowie. So John sent a message to Mr. Dowie. My sister has died, but my spirit will not let her go. I believe that if you pray with me, God will heal her. And then John waited. And John had to wait a little while before Mr. Dowie replied. But then he answered, John, hold on to God. I am praying with you, and she will live. As John read the message, his faith in God exploded inside of him. He knew God could heal his sister, and John was going to keep on praying until she was alive again. It was like he was fighting with death as he prayed over her. He told death to leave his sister alone in the name of Jesus. and God's power is so great, and John's faith was so strong that death had to obey. After 1 hour of prayer, his sister sat up. She was alive. A few days later, it was Christmas Day. She was back to normal, and she joined the rest of the family for their Christmas dinner.